Welcome to the Famcast. We are so glad that you have chosen to join us. Just remember, this is real talk, real people, real lives with real messes, just trying to point our kids to Jesus. And so thanks for being a part of the community of parents and just people who care about the next generation. And so I'm excited because we have got Cindy Schwarz coming along. Woo-hoo! She has been the one that truly has been helping us on the backside of the Famcast, just kind of prioritize what we're talking about, keeping us on schedule, going, hey, in the midst of all the things that you're doing, other things, we need to do the Famcast. And so we have been so thankful for you, and just glad that you get to be a part of it today, not from behind the camera or behind the mic, but you get to be in it, and we get to hear from you. So
it's fun to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, tell us just a little bit about you, just a little bit, who lives in your house, and just a little bit about Cindy.
Sure. Well, I've had so much fun working with this team. I have and not in my house, but that have been in my house.
Yeah, that have been in your house.
You know how that goes with lots of kids.
Yes.
I have 5 kids. One that lives in New York and married, one in DC working, and a senior at tech, and then 2 boys still at home and rocking it.
Yeah.
And 10th, what they're going into 11th grade.
Going into 11th.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're in the same small group as my son, Keen.
That's right.
So, yeah.
It's fun times.
It is fun times.
They're great.
It's like they're turning into little men. Like, what's up with that?
I know.
They didn't sign up for that, right?
No, they didn't sign up for it.
It's like they're these little dudes, and then they turn into these young men, and so it's interesting.
But isn't it fun too?
That's a great adventure.
It
I
is
love
fun.
it.
I do too.
I love it. Well, we're going to talk today. We thought we'd just kind of dive into a little bit of influence, because I think that's one of those things as a parent that you can't abdicate it. Regardless of where you land as a parent, we always say you're going to be the most influential person or most influential relationship that's going to be in their life. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have a choice of to influence or not to influence. You're going to influence.
It's going to happen.
Right? And so in this inevitability of it, we've got to make sure that we want to influence in, I guess, the most positive or the most constructive way. I don't know. What are your thoughts on some of the influence?
Well, I mean, this inevitability of influence is so crazy to me. I mean, it's going to happen.
Right.
And as you said, as parents, we kind of think, oh, it's all out there. But we'll get to that, I think, a little bit more when we chat. But why don't you share with us where you see, because you work with kids so much, tell us where you see the most places of the inevitability that you can't get away from it.
Yeah. Well, I think you've got the most time. As a parent, you've got the most time and you've got the most words. And a lot of times with influence, I've found that kids, when they get, I always call it, when you find your life in a pile, you run to the person that's had the most presence in your life, who has maybe even spoken the most words to you. They've been invested in you. And when they hit a rough patch, they're not going to go to just anybody. They're going to go to that one person where they feel like, man, they truly do love me. They truly do have my best interests, and I respect what's about to come out of their mouth. Because that's the thing is influence is almost like a tool. We read this. I read it in the Andy Stanley book as well. Like, influence is a tool, and respect is the tool belt. And so if we're going to have influence and be able to use the tool of influence to positively affect our kids, then we've also got to grow up a sense of respect. And kids, I think, look at parents, us as parents, and say, okay, what are they saying to me? And then is what they're saying to me matching up with what they do? Because it can be one thing to be able to say, hey, I love you. I want to support you. I want the best for you. And if a parent does something the exact opposite to maybe they don't show up, maybe they've been absent, maybe they have never told their kid, hey, I love you, or I'm proud of you, or I could say I'm here to support you, but then if I don't ever show up, that goes against it. And so the kid loses respect in that spot of going, okay, you're saying that, but I'm not seeing that.
So you're saying that make your walk match your talk.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean,
yeah.
if you're saying I love you, they get to a certain stage where those words are only seen by action sometimes. I mean,
Correct.
yeah, you need both, like you're
Yeah.
saying, but it needs to match.
Yeah.
That's power.
I completely. And as a parent, sometimes isn't that it's a little bit scary sometimes.
Yeah.
When you, and especially if you're a first time parent, just the weight of being a parent, knowing that I'm going to have the most influence on this life. Like, here's this life that's just now taking breath. And it's up to me to be able to influence them. One, I think first off, just to see the grace and the love of the Father. And so like the first glimpse of a heavenly Father's love is going to be from the way that we as parents love our kids. The first sign of grace, of this undeserved favor, is going to come through a time where maybe they really mess up, and from us, they know that, man, that doesn't affect the way that I love you.
Yeah. I'm sure you got some stories about that. I mean, it is such a privilege to be able to have your kids mess up in front of you and to still say, I love you.
Yeah, completely.
I mean, because isn't that what we all want?
Yeah.
I mean, we know that as adults, especially walking with the Lord. But for them to get to see that, I mean, I feel like that grows us closer too.
No, completely.
In our relationship with them.
And telling your kids when you mess up. Because that's another, I think, a pitfall
from the
that
flip
parents,
side you're talking.
Yeah, even the flip side of it too, as well, of going, hey, I didn't get this right 100% of the time. I don't always make the right choice. I try and I want to, but my intent isn't enough. I've got to be able to come through in that. And so I think being able to say, hey, here's some of the pitfalls. Here's where I messed up. Even sometimes coming, and I've had to come to my kids after I've said something to them. Maybe my tone got a little elevated, or maybe I was on a side that I thought was the right one that wasn't. Right. And then had to come back to them and go, I'm so sorry. Like,
that's not easy, but it's so good for them.
Because we can't be a superhero as a parent. There's no possible way that you're going to get perfection. And if we always strive to be perfect in it and never admit that we're wrong, never self-aware enough to be able to come back and say, hey, I should have gone this way instead of that way, or I should have handled this differently. If we don't do that, then we also lose influence, because then we're not real.
Right. You know what I love as I'm listening to you say that too, is when you do take the chance to apologize or to correct and say, I could have handled it differently. When you do stay your line at other times, they know how important that is then to you,
right? And
how important it is in your family.
Completely.
Therefore your expectation of them. So I think if it's always right and you're always having to be the parent and think you're authority and you can't admit that you may have, which you do make mistakes.
Yeah.
I mean, I do
right.
at least, right? Yeah. Then that's where you lose the respect,
Completely.
and so then when they may not agree with you, but you're holding the line on something else, they can respect that a little bit easier.
So we are going to influence no matter what.
Yeah. And we talked about it, influence being powerful just in that situation too. Anything else about influence in the sense of
I think realizing some of the power of it, that even in because we always kind of think of like, okay, the things that I'm going to say are going to be the hold the most weight or have the most power in it, but it can also be things that we don't say. I mean, think about you can have a bunch of people that are reflecting back on the relationship that they had with their parents, and you can hear them a lot of times go, I wish I would have heard this. I wish he would have said, or she would have said this to me. Like growing up in a home maybe that doesn't hear the word, I love you, or hear the word, I'm proud of you, no matter what. It can be just as powerful of what not to say. And maybe for some parents, you grow up and you haven't heard that, and so that you don't say it,
right?
Because you've been a product or you've been influenced by the way that you've grown up. And I think it's fighting against that's what I have had, but I know what I needed and I wanted. And so even though I don't have a model of what that looks like, I'm gonna choose to influence this way. I'm gonna tell my kid every single time that they're leaving that I love them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell my kid every single time, whether they succeed or whether they fail, that, hey, I'm proud of them.
Mm-hmm.
And there does come sometimes where you're like, if they, I would say this, like if they don't do everything that they can be, like, I guess I'm trying to word this right. But like on a test, if one of my kids just completely said, I don't really want to study. And so they bomb it, totally bomb it.
Never happened though.
Never. But they don't give their best effort. They don't put all the effort that they could be into it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to come into that and go, hey, I'm so proud of the way that you did that.
You're not going to fake it.
Right. But there's opportunity for me to go in there and go, okay, hey, it's not about the grade in this.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what they miss too, because they think it might be just about the performance. It's not about the grade, but like, did you do and reach the best version of yourself in that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you do all that you could do in that? Because if you did, then I'm proud of you no matter what,
right.
Whether it's an F or an A, put your best effort in it. And then we can deal with the other stuff. But I do want them to know that I love them no matter what. Because I've got a Heavenly Father that tells me every single day that I love you no matter what.
Mm-hmm. And that builds character.
Yeah.
That influence of using your words to build their character and not just an outcome and a behavior. I mean, what I hear from you when you talk about saying I love you, saying I'm proud of you for who they really are and how they're being, isn't because they always performed
right.
a certain way, but because of who they are.
Completely.
And you might not like them. I know how many times I've said I love you, and right. I do not like them in the moment.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm just going to say. Yeah. But that's a moment. The love is always there, and that's what needs to always be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the more that, when we're talking about respect, the more they respect, the more influence you have, and the more influence you have, the more weighty your words are. Mm-hmm. I think that's what can build up. And so you can speak potential, you can speak truth. And I think as parents, that's one of the things that we've got to be able to do is we see things in our kids that they don't see in themselves.
Correct.
Because a lot of times what they are basing their self-worth, maybe their self-esteem off of is that performance, or maybe it's made on something, a comment that's been online about them or in passing at school. And they have all these markers that then kind of make withdrawals of their self-esteem or their worth. And for us, it's how do I get them to ultimately see what we see in them? And that is, man, you have so much potential.
Yeah.
So much capacity to be able to love, so much capacity to be able to become and step into these great things that God has planned for them.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's got to be other people that you say should be an influence in kids' lives. Tell us, I mean, to me, it takes a village. Completely. I mean, whether it's coaches, teachers, but it's not just random people.
No.
I think of it as intentional. In raising my kids, sometimes it was importing positive influences when it didn't seem to be coming naturally. But tell me how you think about outside village.
Yeah, I've always said, like, it takes probably about 5 voices, other voices besides the parental voices, speaking into my kids' lives. And so I want it coming from a lot of different areas. I would, a coach, a teacher, a small group leader, there's going to be friends that are going to be that voice. And so being okay with my voice doesn't have to be the end all. I think as a parent, naturally, your voice is going to hold a lot of weight because you've got the most time, you've got the most words. But there's sometimes when they can be involved in relationships that are outside of the family unit, that those words then hold incredible weight and make it such a difference. Like I've had some of my kids will come home from, whether it's home from practice, home from, maybe it's a camp that they went to over the weekend, that they heard some incredible words that a camp speaker or a coach was saying. And they come back and they're like, Dad, oh, let me tell you this. And they say something that I've been saying to them, or that we as parents have been saying to them. And they're like, this just clicked. This is so amazing. And I have to suppress my inner voice is going, do you know how many times I've said that? It's got to be in the thousands that I've said some of the same words in the same way. But because it comes from a different voice, because it comes from a different perspective, it just clicks. And what I have to do as a parent, and what I encourage parents to do, is the end goal is not that we get the credit for the words that we're saying. The end goal is that hopefully whatever has been said to them is reinforcing that next step that they need to take.
Right.
That's the most important thing, is that we're looking at them and going, okay, oh, you're able to take this step, whether I've said it or not. That's the end goal. So I'm happy.
I mean, deep down, we love it when it happens.
Of course.
But how hard is it to just not say, but I told you so?
Right. I know.
But it doesn't help.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
But it's so good to have that come from other places.
Yes.
I know that happens so often here with student leaders, especially interns in the summer.
Yeah.
And kids being plugged into small groups. I mean, they're just sponges.
They are.
With peers by the time they're teenagers. But it doesn't have to all be negative sponging.
Right.
It can be a lot of positive sponging.
Completely.
And our efforts in that influence is often getting them places before they're driving, or taking them. And then we're exhausted and tired and all those things. But when we can get them into situations where they're hearing the same things we want to say, but they're not hearing it as often from us, or as well from us, maybe.
Yeah. No, and encouraging them to be in some of those, I guess, environments where they are going to have those type of discussions that we know are going to reinforce some of the values that we have as a family. Right. Like in our home, it was not a choice of do I go to church or not. It was kind of like an understood of, you're going to have, I want you to be a part of once a week, a spiritual conversation. So wherever you need to go find that, that's fine. Okay. Like if it's going to be at church, I think that's the best place, because that's where, I worked. And, I trusted the whole system and the leaders that were going to be there were going to be vetted, and they were going to reinforce a lot of that. But if my kids would have been, hey, I don't want to go, I just can't find a spot at our church. Okay. But you don't have a choice whether you're going to be in an environment where you're going to have a spiritual conversation. So you need to find it in another spot. Yep. Whether that's FCA, whether that's Young Life, whether that is maybe at a different church, I want you to be in that, because I know the value that it places, that it provides in growing up.
Yeah, we did that too. And I think giving you still your value and your expectation of where that influence and what you want that influence to be, but putting some of that ownership into their hands of choosing which one. Kind of, they may come back to the same ones you want, but it really doesn't matter. You're saying just own some place where you're going to spiritually be having these dialogues and conversations, and those.
Because left to our own, we're not going to have those.
Yeah,
and especially as teenagers, and if they could be left to their own choices, and I know some parents will be like, well, I don't want them to hate church, or I don't want to force them to go to church. But man, if we don't ever, our natural drift as human beings is always going to be away from where God wants us to be. We drift away from God because that's just our nature. But if you have certain environments that you're stepping into on a consistent basis that are going to have you and get you to talk about and maybe even be confronted with, here's some great ideas about the faith. Here's how I take that next step in my faith journey. Then we can fight that natural drift, and it calls us back into our best selves, which is this full life that's offered in Christ.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that if we don't help them realize that value, then they're not going to come back to it.
Right. It's an influence.
Yes.
Just keeping that out there for them and having their peers
completely
also alongside them in that. Yeah. So as a parent, I haven't heard you say that as they get older, especially, that abdicate that responsibility or ignore the amount of influence that parents have.
Yeah.
You want to tell us more before we have to wrap up about how to think about that as a parent? I know that it was hard for me to draw the line, and sometimes I goofed and being a friend too soon, and keeping that parental role there so that when other people disappointed or life disappointed, we still were steady. We still were an influence.
Right.
Anything you want to?
And I think as they get later in life, it depends about, again, it goes back to that respect. Like the more respect that they have for you, the more influence you're going to have. The more that you don't abuse that influence and try to manipulate, the more they're going to want to come back and talk to you about that and invite that influence in. And so I think it's as they are coming up through high school and then going into college, it's giving them spots to be able to make decisions, to be able to work out some of their own values on their own while you're beside them. That allows them to go, oh, I can come back and tell her because or him and go, hey, what do you think about this? Because they're not going to overpower because you've had practice of that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's real tough if you're going to try to hit the brakes of like, I'm going to control all the way until you go out on your own. And then you're like, they're not going to want to come back for control.
Right.
But if I can ease up and I can have basically an on-ramp to that time when we move into our friend relationship, into that friend season of parenting, if I've practiced that and I've found that that's when they come back to you because they respect it. They want it. They love you because you've loved them well through that season.
Yeah,
so
through it all.
Yeah.
Love chatting about influence today.
Yeah. Thanks, Cindy. Appreciate it. And we're going to wrap it up. And again, thank you so much just for joining us. We will see you next time on the Famcast.